to correctly perceive an image, it fails to act as a mirror. When the individual allows the lordly elements, however, to gain dominance, the heart becomes an abode of knowledge, of wisdom, and certainty. The second part of the question deals with the qalb as a mirror and its relationship with the preserved tablet or the Lawh Mahfuz. For Al-Ghazali, the qalb has two doors, the one through which it communicates with the world of senses and another through which it shares with the spiritual world. And Al-Ghazali uses the similitude of streams supplying a reservoir to explain this relationship. It is possible to divert the flow of streams from the streams to the pool to ensure the purity of its contents. An emptied reservoir can, however, also sprout a fresh gush from its base to ensure an even purer supply from its underground sources. A qalb spiritually aligned to the preserved tablet produces a pure stream of knowledge, wisdom, and discernment. The preserved tablet continuously diffuses its knowledge. It finds its accommodation in a qalb prepared to receive it. The third part of the question deals with the preparation the qalb has to undergo for its proper function as a mirror to reflect the true nature of its sensory experiences on the one hand, and the divine guidance as it emanates from the celestial Quran contained in the preserved tablet on the other. The purpose of the acquisition of all knowledge is to adorn the heart. A heart preoccupied with the world of senses cannot devote the energies and attention the acquisition of expertise any subject requires. Al-Ghazali's remedy for a rusty mirror is that it begins to regain its sheen by polishing it with the remembrance of Allah or dhikr. This process restores the qalb to its vitality. It puts a sense of meaning and purpose into its striving to acquire knowledge in the first place. Al-Ghazali summarizes this relationship between a person and his or her creator and knowledge by referring to a four-stage process that characterizes an individual's path of development in this regard. Firstly, it begins with awe or sense of reverential fear or taqwa for the creator, and this leads to a spontaneous and continuous dhikr of Allah. And this constant remembrance of Allah leads to a stage of mystical unveiling or kashf. This stage also reveals the hidden secrets and delightful discoveries associated with deep learning and reflection. And this leads to a greater sense of humility, awe, and reverence a truly learned person displays. Conscious learning, and this is what I sort of gather from you, is thus a profoundly transformative exercise. It signals the true purpose and intent of striving to make the heart or qalb an organ of perception, a mirror capable of reflecting divine greatness. The unveiling which occurs on the day of judgment affords a cultivated qalb the occasion to render its highest expression of awe and humility when the soul finally meets its creator. Shukran.
Thank you, Dr. Rafiq. Shall we now move to, thank you very much, and we'll cover some of that again. So if anybody did not grasp some of the elements that Dr. Rafiq shared, then we will get a chance to look at it again. Sister Ilham? Ilham?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Just a correction, my name is Iman.
Sorry, I don't know why I say Iman. Sorry, Iman. Sorry. That's what we call a senior moment. My apologies.
Okay. So according to Imam al-Ghazali, there are 5 intrinsic veils that blocks one's heart from gaining divine knowledge. The first one is an imperfection in its own nature. So, for example, a child's heart does not yet inhabit a certain level of intellect and understanding that is gained through maturity. The second one is acts of disobedience, such as succumbing to greed and any low desires. Also, this is related to being non-apologetic or remorseful of these sins and wrongdoings, which adds to the impurities of the heart. And then the third one is one's heart may be turned away from the truth. When one's priorities are directed towards bad or obsessing over material things, and that is where you are contributing, or those are the things that you are contributing all your energy and efforts towards. The fourth thing is what he calls the veil, which is kind of like blindly following. So following an idea or custom basically because that is the views of the masses, and not being willing to find the truth for oneself. The fifth one is ignorance, which I'm not going to lie, this one kind of threw me off a little bit and it was heavy, so I'm going to let Uncle Ebrahim elaborate a little bit more about that. And then the stages of life of the light of faith, according to Imam al-Ghazali, the first one is the belief of the ordinary man, which is another instance of blind faith, which the book refers to as taqleed. But I understand it as a purer instance of blind faith in which we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah's messenger. In other words, it's the case of being told that something is so. And the second stage is the belief through proof. So the case of understanding that something is so. And then the third one is knowing for certain. So the case of knowing that it's so. Yeah.
Shukran. Thank you, Iman. Sorry. Shall we get to Sister Jamia Khalan?
Yes, my response is quite short, just because I found the question a little bit confounding, to be honest. So the distinction that Imam Ghazali makes he makes this distinction between intellectual sciences, which is distinct from religious sciences. He then says that the intellectual sciences are divided into two, which is sciences of the world and sciences of the world to come. So the sciences of the world are the ones that we kind of would know, like he gives examples of medicine, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and so on. And sciences of the world is this other knowledge, what he describes as knowledge of states of the heart, knowledge of Allah and his attributes and his acts, and also knowledge of defects in religious works. I wasn't entirely clear what that was, whether those were theological debates, but this was not religious sciences, because that was something separate. So I wasn't completely clear what the defects in were referring to. But nonetheless, he argues that the sciences of the world and the sciences of the world to come, which is of the hereafter, these two knowledge sets, in a sense, are incompatible, because he claims whoever studies the one will have his insight into the other lesson, and he makes it quite makes this argument quite strongly, and contrast these. He uses another example as East versus West, suggesting that these are sets of knowledges that are like almost facing in different directions, and says those who are wise in the one is ignorant of the other. And I found this quite difficult to accept, almost in the sense of saying that, if you immerse yourself in the one form of knowledge here, intellectual science, then you can't do so in the other. And where he's also arguing that it's really knowledge of the hereafter that's going to bring you closer to Allah. He's saying that actually to combine these two knowledges is really only within the kind of domain of the prophets, because they are given divine guidance to do so. So it was a little, both disheartening to kind of hear that story. So what is the journey then that we embark on if, from the get-go, he's saying this is not actually something that we can ever attain. What then does this journey constitute when we begin to become aware and conscious of the marvels of the heart, as you're explaining them to us through this course? Shukran.
Yes, thank you, Sister Jamia. So I think let me jump off from there and give a quick explanation. So Ghazali makes this distinction between, what he calls the sciences of religion and the and the intellectual sciences. And he's already said that also in the book of knowledge, where he makes also this distinction. And that is possibly one of the struggles we have today in Islamic thought, and especially when it comes to the debate on epistemology. What is knowledge? How do Muslims grapple with knowledge? Obviously, there's the historical Muslim tradition where Muslims took from Greek knowledge, Indian knowledge, and so on. And Ghazali is one of those people who very freely access all the knowledge sources of his time. But then you have the colonial period in which Muslims find themselves, and they got Western knowledge, after colonial conquest. And ever since, the knowledge debate has been the number one debate as to how do Muslims view knowledge. Is it only knowledge of faith that has the highest value and those things that lead to salvation? And what about knowledge of the world? That is, as he points out, geometry and all the kind of medicine and all the sciences and so on. So Ghazali is a person of his time and has created this kind of, two sets of knowledge. And then he says, if one is good in the one, you'll not be good in the other, and so on. So that also makes it a little bit more problematic. I think that's one of the issues that we have to struggle with, in that I would be advocating that one needs both sets of knowledge. And later scholars such as Shah Waliullah, for instance, talks about how it is absolutely part of deen that one must develop your civilization, your culture, your history. Ghazali will not disagree with that, but I think this will also show you, also is a kind of a glimpse into Ghazali's own state of mind, that he partitions knowledge in this way because he wants to draw people's attention a great deal to the knowledge of the heart and knowledge of faith. And that's one of the challenges that we find in someone like Ghazali. So I would not make this to be the first thing we disagree with the Ghazali, but it's something that we might find that it's his choice, and it might not be something that we can accept today, or might not be functional for us today. The other quote that you had is that, when he talks on page 49, so whenever you hear about a strange thing in the field of religion, which people wise in the sciences deny, do not let their denial delude you so that you do not accept it. For it is impossible for one who walks the eastern path to possess goods that exist only in the West. Were you referring to that, Sister Jamia?
Yes.
Okay.
And also when he earlier he contrasts them and says that they are like two scales of the balance, and like the east and west.
Right. No, I get it. So I think this maybe the translation doesn't do his idea justice. So he says, if you're walking in this one direction, if you're walking in this direction of the east, because you're walking in a different, you're not going to get the knowledge on the other side. That is, again, his kind of way of partitioning, this discussion. So as I made clear my own preference, that I think it will have to be one that we need both. And the question is, how do you weigh? So in this citation on page 49, that when you hear a strange thing in religion, people of sciences deny that. And he said, you should not let the denial delude you. But later on, I will show in the presentation, Ghazali says that even the questions that are revealed and or issues that are revealed require intellect to understand it. So he's not saying you just have to accept it. You need to have some level of understanding. I wonder are you people seeing at the bottom of your screen a kind of a transcription of what I'm saying?
Yes.
How does one switch that off?
I have no idea.
It's very irritating.
It's the first time I'm seeing it, and I think
yes, I must have done something to my Zoom or something.
Setting. Yeah, it came up with your setting, but I've no idea.
Goodness gracious. Yeah, this is really strange. If anybody who's smart on this can just let me know how to switch this off. Okay, good. So let's move to the first discussion that I want to share, and I think Dr. Rafiq Khan already mentioned it, is how Ghazali talks about questions of the various qualities, and here he uses a very interesting categorization. So there are 4 mingle factors in every human being's heart. We have the qualities of beasts of prey, Sifat al-Sab'iyya, and then we have brutish qualities, that is, As-Sifat al-Bahimiyya, and it's not entirely sure what he, why he makes this 2 categorization. On one hand, beasts of prey, and then brutish qualities. So he does think that certain animals are more brutish than they are preying, like for instance, a wolf or a lion, or animals will be beasts of prey, and say certain animals like say a camel or a cow would have a lot of strength and will have brute qualities and so on. But then he also talks about the demonic qualities, Sifat al-Shaytaniyya. And then he talks about, and the most interesting one in my view, is the sustainer-like qualities, the Rububiyyah, what I would call, what the book translates as the Lord-like qualities or sovereign qualities, As-Sifat al-Rabbaniyya. And in other words, what he's trying to say is, remember we talked in this book about this tenuous divine substance in us, which cuts across the spirit, that is the ruh, the nafs, that is the soul, the qalb, the heart. And if he talks about that, Sister Jamia, this thing is really irritating me. If you can do a quick research to see how to switch it off, because you're co-host, that would be really great. So these qualities of Lord-like or sovereign qualities are very important for Ghazali, and he's going to show us how this works. So let's move on from that slide to this. So some of these issues, that the consequences of these negative qualities, the first 3 that he showed us, that is the beastly, the brutish, and the satanic qualities, they generate these negative qualities within a human being. Enmity, you detest other people. So anger, the root cause of all that is anger. And that's how we frame it. I mean, possibly we will frame it today differently because we have a different kind of understanding of the ego, but at least in his world, anger was seen as the power of ghadab, the power of that makes you not control yourself. So ghadab, anger, results in enmity, detestation, attacking people, beating and cursing them. I think we hope we don't know too many of such people. Then there's the idea of appetence, shahwa, that creates brutish acts of gluttony, greed, carnal desire. They are all a part of that. And then there are the satanic ones. Now, this idea, the satanic, is basically encapsulates what we as human beings, we share with animals, anger and appetence, right? And I said last week that without appetence, without shahwa, we can't do things. Without a desire, we will not procreate, we will not eat, and so on. So That's an important component of us, but the question is, it must be controlled. But humans, so what the fault lies in us as humans, in that we do not use our power of discernment, our tamiz, to distinguish between things. Because of the absence of this capacity, this power of discernment, that gets blunted over time because of our habits. And we let these various drives, anger, appetites dominate us. So our power of discernment becomes blunted. And that means that we pursue evil ways, deceit, guile, cunning. And then one of the things that Ghazali talks about, and the Quran mentions it, that we reach such a level that human beings begin to look at evil as if it was a good, it were a good. وَيَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ يُحْسِنُونَ صُنْعًا, that they think that they are doing some really great task. That is the level of perversion that can happen to the human soul. And that's what Ghazali is pointing out here. And these are the various verses of the Quran that you have already come across. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُ هَوَاهُ فَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ وَخَتَمَ عَلَى سَمْعِهِ وَقَلْبِهِ وَجَعَلَ عَلَى بَصَرِهِ غِشَاوَةً. Have you not seen the one who deifies his or her own desires? God has knowingly led him or her astray and sealed his or her hearing and heart and put a veil over his sight. This is an outcome we all want to avoid by every chance that we have. There's the verse from the surah of the cave. قل هل ننبئكم بالأخسرين أعمالا الذين ضل سعيهم في الحياة الدنيا وهم يحسبون أنهم يحسنون صنعا. Shall we tell you whose works are most fruitless? Those whose striving in the world has been mistaken, even as they reckon they are doing good deeds. This is a really sobering wake-up call to all of us, that and we ought to be sobered by this kind of warning of how this obstructs our heart, and how this then obstructs our sight and our ability to discern things. The interesting element that Ghazali talks about is this element that we have within ourselves, this Lord-like or sovereign-like qualities. And that's all to do with this ruh, that spirit within us. And the Quranic verse, قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. This idea that the ruh has a divine aspect. And therefore, that divine aspect must not result in a egotistical presentation of ourselves. This divine aspect is part of the magic of why we can think and why we can do certain things that other creatures cannot do. But it has to be received with a certain kind of humility. And if we begin to take this aspect to be extremely, we think of this as a great gift and talent, and then we lord over others, that can be really destructive to us. What that quality really requires is that we draw closer to Allah, not to exhibit superiority, exclusiveness, to be despotic and lack in servitude and humility. Because oftentimes human beings do that. But one of the great insights of Ghazali is that the way he diagnoses it, and he says that when human beings are acting despotically, when they do act in this uncontrolled way, in the superior way, and so on, it is that component in them. So Ghazali diagnoses why we behave in the way we do behave. That is very interesting. And so you might say that, okay, now why did Allah put within us this element of, this divine connection within us? Well, that is the right way of using that is to grow closer to Allah, that you have that hotline within you. You don't have to go and seek it. It is already placed within you, so that you do not have an excuse and say, I did not have access. So you won't have that excuse that we don't have access. But you can also abuse the hotline. You can also abuse that direct connection you have. You can abuse that capacity you have within yourself. And therefore Ghazali warns us that that can be put to it can be tremendously harmful uses of that. And he spends a lot of time discussing this. But one of the interesting aspects that he expounds is that it is also this element, this ruh, that gives us a desire to know things. We want to know everything. Excuse me. And when we find ourselves ignorant, we are aggrieved, we are saddened that we don't know. And if we don't have knowledge, and we don't use that capacity properly, fully, then we're also going to get into misguidance. So it's a two-edged sword. It can be used constructively, but what Ghazali really shows is that this aspiration that we have as human beings to have knowledge, to understand the world around us and to understand ourselves is precisely because of this quality of rububiyyah within us. This Rabb-like quality, this sovereign-like quality. And that is precisely what makes Adam the generic forefather, what makes Adam different from all other creation, that human beings have been given the names of all things, knowledge, because وَنَفَخْنَا فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِنَا, because we inserted into Adam of our spirit, this our spirit. And there's ruh min amrina, that the ruh is our matter, is Allah says. That shows this very deep and intimate connection between human beings and their creator. But I think Ghazali wants to make both clear the ethical challenges in that, but also the positive ways in which we can harness this quality to grow closer to God, but also to let the knowledge of God fill us, and we have the fullness within us, and we can also understand the world better. And that is the quality that makes it possible. Ghazali then gives us that, within us we have, under our skin, we are four beings at once. A pig that is identified with shahwa, with unbridled desire. The dog that has these kinds of, characteristics of not a brute, but these animal-like qualities, and a demon within us, a demon that combines these issues, and the demon also leads us astray based on knowledge, these satanic qualities within us. And then we can also be a sage. And basically we want to let the sage rule and, suppress those other three components and make the sage the king, so to speak. And the positive effects, the effects of positive qualities of the heart is that we acquire knowledge, wisdom, hikmah, certainty, yaqeen. We grasp the true nature of things. And when we have these positive qualities in the heart, our knowledge gives us insight, basira. It gives us that insight, and knowledge and insight rules, and we can suppress our desires. And therefore, it also develops within us these positive qualities, a certain kind of worthiness that we advance beyond other creatures thanks to knowledge. And that, when we talk about, that human dignity is precisely this, that human beings are the creature that know things. They can make wise decisions. That is in Ghazali's view, the most important characteristic that we have. It is the kind of knockout characteristic in the human being. And if we use it optimally, we will be great beneficiaries of it. And we will be good unto ourselves and unto others. That the other kinds of consequences will be that the positive qualities of the heart keeps the animal qualities under control. The first three, the pig, the dog, the demonic qualities under control. And we develop chastity and modesty, contentment and quietness, abstemiousness, godliness and piety, courage, gallantry, valor, and dignity. In other words, we stand by what we have, and we always are fighting off people who want to pull us down from these good qualities and turn us into what we don't want to be. What is an indignity? An indignity is when someone just tears at you, embarrasses you, makes you lose your self-control. These are all indignities. And when you have dignity, you have self-control, you have patience, you have gentleness, you have endurance. And Ghazali is very, very keen to make us stay within the control of our positive qualities. And how do we acquire that? How do we deepen those qualities? By the remembrance of Allah. And it is the Ghazali does, there's a hadith that says the one whose heart is the exalter has a protector from God over that one. But according to Ghazali's commentators, that hadith doesn't have a good source. But other verses of the Quran and so on says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub." In the remembrance of Allah, hearts find rest. That go is a mistake there. So in the remembrance of Allah, the hearts find rest, find itminan, find a certain amount of contentment and satisfaction. And that will create an environment in the heart. And when we talk about environment of the heart, what are we talking about? We're talking about the soul, the nafs, and we're talking about the ruh, because the heart is kind of the best place that we can identify where that happens. So always remember, when Ghazali talks about the heart, he's also talking about those two components. And because the heart is the place that makes that environment grow. I think some of you have already talked about that in your presentation. So negative qualities of the heart cause a darkness. He imagines the heart as a mirror. And when you do the negative qualities of the heart gradually and slowly create a darkening smoke on the mirror of the heart. And then at some point it becomes so dark, is no longer translucent. And things from outside cannot go in, things from inside can't go out. And that is what the Quran talks about, that when the hearts have earned a certain rust, the hearts have become rusty. And the result is, one is the true perception of reality that one ought to have. That perception of reality is now destroyed, or it is obscured. And as a result, also the correct practice of the deen is impacted as a result of that. And human beings become indifferent to the meaningful things in life. Then we're just living like brutes, and we're just living like beasts. And there's no higher purpose in life. And there's this very interesting quote by Maymun bin Mihran, who was a tabi'i, a follower, what's his name, who elaborates at great length on page 33 on the blackening of the heart, and you can consult that yourself. But it more or less says the same thing, that how gradually the heart becomes blackened because of this dark smoke that is coming onto the heart. So I think one of the interesting things is that Ghazali explains that. Obviously, the text is a little bit more complicated when you read it on your own, but you can see he uses very ordinary language to graphically show us, how does the heart become dark. So always we have to think about the heart as a mirror, and since mirrors are made of a certain metal by certain leads, he also thinks that you can polish the mirror, and we all know how to polish a mirror. And how do you polish the mirror? By the remembrance of Allah. And he talks about the 4 kinds of heart. The believing heart is clean and its lamp shines. The unbelieving heart, that is dark and upside down. The hardened heart is in the sheath of evil, because the hardened heart now is no longer sensitive and can then do evil things. And then he has an interesting character of the broad heart. Now, it's not something where you say someone is big-hearted. That's something different. Broad heart, he says that where the heart contains 2, opposite things, belief and hypocrisy, or belief and things that, the belief that is so shaky that it's also mixing up with hypocrisy. And I think that that's also a heart that Ghazali wouldn't want us to have, that we have to drive out the hypocrisy by being much more earnest about what it is that we believe in and that we do. Now, the question of how belief can coexist with hypocrisy, you can believe certain things, but what is challenging is that if your belief is not accompanied by practice in accordance with that belief, hypocrisy comes in. In other words, you say things with your mouth, but which things that you do not do. يَقُولُونَ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ. You say it with your mouth only, but لِمَ تَقُولُ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Why do you say that which you do not do? So always, true faith is what we call a praxis, belief and a practice. And that is the crucial point that Ghazali is trying to point here. So that was supposed to be a question. How do you define the heart? And it's that subtle, tenuous substance of an ethereal, spiritual sort. This is one definition I want all of you to remember. If anything you remember from this class, do remember a definition of the heart. Latifa ruhaniya rabbaniya. A tenuous substance of an ethereal, spiritual sort. Now, what Ghazali is saying is that, remember that this definition, or these elements of this definition, cut across the description of the heart, cut across the description of the spirit and the soul. But this tenuous substance controls all limbs of the body. And let me say something else. The spirit, for instance, when Ghazali says in other places that the spirit is neither attached to our body, but nor separate from it. Remember, we said that at the opening, that the spirit, that the ruh is neither attached to the body nor separate from it. That itself is a mystery. Yes, we know the soul has different forms, and through creation, from in the womb, we have different stages of the soul, a kind of a vegetative soul, then an animal soul, until we develop it and so on. The soul is the ruh, the nafs is the quality that keeps on growing and keeps on differing and so on, but it remains a person, but the various stages of the person. So this tenuous substance, which Ghazali says the heart controls all the limbs of the body. The reason he says why the heart controls all the limbs of the body, because the heart is also connected to intentionality. It's from the heart that we intend. I make my niyyah, I make an intention. And normally says I make a true intention, I make a sincere intention. Remember, these words, sincerity, true, and so on and so forth, always connected to the heart. So they're heart connected, and therefore it's such an important way that Ghazali articulates this and says it is the heart. And therefore, this definition of the heart as being part of a complex, interrelated relationship, heart, soul, spirit. I'm going in opposite direction, or you can go spirit, soul, heart, from top to down or from bottom up. Think of the heart, not the physical heart, not the biological heart that we have, but the spiritual heart that we have as the base station. In it is located the soul, connected to it in some way, and there's a nexus that we don't exactly know how to explain, this nexus between the spirit and the soul. It's neither attached nor separate. But we know that once that nexus is severed from the soul, we, as we know ourselves, as I know myself, will no longer be that person. This spirit will have its own journey. But Ghazali uses the heart, is the most accessible metaphor, because it controls all the limbs of the body. And that what he means is that the soul and the spirit, all of these things work together. But he uses the word heart, but he means that complex operation. How do we know things? The heart or soul tells us the relationship, our relationship to things. I have a relationship to this pencil. I have a relationship to this room. I have this relationship to this world. Again, it's not. Most of us would think the brain tells us. Yes, the brain is not ignored, but the brain is seen as an instrument. But the true comprehension and the gravitas of all that, at least for religious people and for spiritual people and for people like Ghazali, it is the heart. And the heart reflects the forms. So key word here is forms. The heart is a mirror. It reflects forms and changing appearances. Every intelligible or every known thing has a specific nature, he says. So everything I know this computer, I know this mouse, I know this book, all these intelligible things has a specific nature. So what does he mean by the nature of a thing? What he says, what he means is a specific perfection of a thing. What makes this book into a book is that it acquires a certain perfection. It is complete. We will not mistake this for a screwdriver. We will not mistake this for a pencil. It's understood in its perfection of a thing. Unless it's ambiguous, unless there's a book that also has the shape of a pen or pencil, then we are a little bit confused and so on. And then that will be ambiguous. It also tells us about the essence of a thing. This book is essence of it is paperness, or essence of a thing, it is matter. Matter is the hakika of this thing, the specific nature of a thing. And therefore, the matter of a book is different from the matter of so a book and a stone will share elements of matter, but they will have different forms, right? It's a form that gives us the book and makes a stone a stone. So every specific nature has a form. And it is this form that is imprinted on the heart. And so what is knowledge? Knowledge is the imprint on the heart. Is an imprint or are the imprints on the heart. So this comes into the kind of nitty-gritty of epistemology of knowing things. He breaks it down. What you know, that what you know has a specific nature. Every nature thing has a form, and then it triangulates, and that is imprinted on the heart. So these are the the relationships that Ghazali, sorry, let me go back to this. Yeah, that Ghazali draws our attention to. Three things in the heart, specific nature of things. I've just mentioned it earlier. And sorry, let me just get out of this. And the specific nature, the heart, the specific nature of things, and representation of the thing in the heart, or the imprint in the heart. So you have the knower, the intelligible nature of the thing, the thing that you know, and then the outcome of this is intelligence, or another word for the intelligence is al-ilm, is knowledge. So there's an active knower, the thing that you know, and intelligence derived. Another word for intelligence derived is knowledge. So can anybody guess, what does Ghazali know? Who is the knower here in this case, in this discussion of Ghazali? In the book, Ghazali says the heart is the knower. It's the heart is the knower. And when obviously when the knower is, then the heart is you as a person, and therefore, you know, the human being knows. But more specifically, the heart is the knower. And Ghazali also gives 5 reasons why the mirror might not properly represent or reflect the images. Can you maybe configure it, or maybe at the later stage you can also post it in a chat? There are 5 reasons why the mirror might not properly reflect the images. Now, this is a very interesting question. Where is God located? Where is God? That's a very interesting question. So obviously Ghazali says that God is in the heart of the believer. The heart of the believer. And there is some discussion about this. Ibn Taymiyyah, for instance, challenges this and says that, you know, that is not accurate. But the Ghazali's commentator, a man by the name of Murtada Zabidi, who was a man of the 18th century, he was born in India, but he's of Yemeni ancestry, and then he migrated to Egypt, where he lived, and he wrote the biggest commentary on Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin. He argues that no, there are many other teachings that corroborate the idea that God is in the heart of the believer. And I find very, very interesting that some of the great poets, especially Mirza Asadullah Ghalib writes, Wafadari basharte ustuwari asla iman hai, mare butkhane mein to Kaaba mein garo Brahman ko. Loyalty based on genuine friendship is the basis of faith. So, you know, friendship and genuineness and faith starts in the heart. Loyalty starts in the heart. And so Ghalib says, loyalty, true truthfulness, love, genuine friendship, that is the foundation on which faith is based. If you don't have loyalty to God, loyalty to a beloved, and so on, then the basis of your faith can also be challenged. And then Ghalib says, if such a man dies in the temple, dies in an idolatrous temple, then such a person deserves to be buried. This Brahmin needs to be buried in the precincts of the Kaaba. I think that is quite audacious. And it's quite brilliant at the same time. It's quite audacious and quite brilliant at the same time. I mean, it shows you that people like Ghalib and others had internalized a lot of, Islamic thought in a very interesting way, and it comes out in their poetry. And you find that a lot in not only in Urdu poetry, but also Persian poetry and Arabic poetry, and many Ibn Arabi and many other thinkers also articulate in that way. What are the causes of a destitute heart? When the heart is destitute. Now, Ghazali says that, there are several, and he has long discussions on this. I've summarized it here. One is there's a natural imperfection that the heart is destitute, and he thinks that the heart of a youth is still imperfect. It's not ready for proper imprints. But then the heart can become dull and destitute because of disobedience. Or the third reason is that the heart is out of focus from true reality. And he gives a very interesting discussion there. You might have a bright heart, he says, but you have a shiny lamp in you, but you need to earn a livelihood. So much preoccupies you that you cannot, keep on kindling this light. Or he says, and interesting that he says you are distracted by your minor religious preoccupations. I thought that was a kind of a knockout thing, that, you are so obsessed about tahara, but you don't, about purification, and you want to do the wudu. Of course, you want to do the wudu properly and all these kind of requirements, and you cannot have salah without tahara, but you forget that the real tahara, the real purity, is the purity of the heart and the purity in your relationship with others. So I thought this is quite interesting, that you miss the true reality, that you miss the true, you miss the thing that is that you need to have an insight, but you are distracted by these minor preoccupations. Third is another challenging thing, that he says, you're obedient, you're disciplined, but no light. Of course, when you're obedient and disciplined, there is some light there. There's some light, otherwise you will not be obedient, you will not be disciplined. You will not do your obediences. And obedience is the real meaning of deen, that you need to obey, you must do ta'ah. So there is light. It's not a heart of a beast, it's not the heart of a brute, it's not a satanic heart. But this light cannot glow further because you're attached to authority. All of us follow authority in some way. But what Ghazali is opposed to, and I pointed it out in my first lecture, and I gave you the quotation from Mizanul Amal, the weigh scale of deeds, where he says that, you have to do some amount of effort, insight. You must do something about that. And if you don't do that, you are going to follow authority blindly or without insight. I'm trying to avoid ableist language, so I didn't use the word blind. I have to really train myself not to use kind of ableist language. So without insight, walled off from reality. We are walled off from reality, and because we follow authority without insight. What Ghazali wants, if you want to follow authority, know why you are following that authority. And he elaborates at length. He says, people get so hung up with the kind of, this is the way, the proper way of doing so on and so on and so forth, that they completely lose out on the additional benefits that might be there. Yeah, last thing he says, you are ignorant of the source from which knowledge must be drawn. So he does say that you must have discursive knowledge. You must have knowledge of the deen. You can't just build that on your desires or your hawa or your passions and so on. You must have knowledge on which you base this. And these efforts will yield knowledge not known previously. So that's what this is the add-on. But if you don't know the source of that knowledge, you don't know this comes from a divine source, the prophetic source, from a source of a sage and a wise person and so on, and you don't know that this forms this body of knowledge, and you don't have full insight of this, that is kind of ignorance that you will suffer. And I think that was more or less the kind of question that I think Iman asked, what is meant by ignorance. So this is something that you already know. The heart is capable of knowing the true things of nature. Why? Because the heart, when it is in a lordly and noble posture, can naturally access knowledge or understand the true nature of things. Remember, going back, that we said that the qualities of the heart can be lordly, rububiyya, and that gives you the insight. Now, how does the rububiyya come? What are the pointers towards this rububiyya? One way that the Quran talks about it is that we carry the amana, we carry the trust. Inna aradna al-amanati ala al-ardi was-samawati. We offered the trust to the earth, to the heavens, but they rejected it out of fear. وَأَشْفَقْنَا مِنْهَا. But حَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانِ. حَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانِ. That human beings, carried out the amana. This trust means, what does trust mean? What does amana mean? We normally trust amana as responsibility and so on, and we think it is action. No, Ghazali says, no, it is not action first. It is acquisition of knowledge of God, ma'rifah. And then you embody tawheed, you understand the oneness of Allah. Then that will set you into operation of becoming a responsible steward in the world. So oftentimes, Ghazali says we must understand what the meaning of amana is. Amana is that great quality within us, the quality of rububiyya, this lordly quality, this noble quality within us. And then he says something interesting. Every human being is capable of bearing this trust. He doesn't say every Muslim. He says, kullu adamiyun, every adami, every human being. And then he moves on to fitra, that is the natural conformity to the truth, right? And we all know what fitra is, this natural conformity to the truth that with which we are born with. But this gets blunted, or it becomes perverted because of our socialization, because of our habits, our practices, and so on. And then because of that, it creates a veil. And when we distort our natural conformity to truth, then the trust, that means knowledge and tawheed, becomes inaccessible. And they are these ahadith that where is God? I think I think this is so important and this is so significant, and I'm keeping coming back to that I think when we have God in our hearts, that's the most important thing. Then Ghazali introduces us to two worlds, and I think he will talk more about that, and I don't want to make it too problematic. But just think about the world of matter and the world of spirits. The world of matter is the world, it's called Alamul Mulki wa Shahada. It's a visible world, and it's a finite world. Or at least it is finite in terms of where we stand. Our relationship to this world has finitude. Then there's the world of spirit, the Alam al-Malakut, invisible world, generally invisible, but only visible through insight. And that is the infinite world. There's no limit to that world. And in all these two domains, the world of matter and the world of spirits, Ghazali later on creates all kinds of intermediate qualities and further subdivisions in that. For now, you just have to, think of these two big ones, and there are many, many different subdivisions there. And how do you access the world of spirits? Through this spirit of the soul, the ruh al-nufus, the spirit in the souls. And this is where the great, miraculous, beautiful things that we all desire, where this happens, when the divine self-manifestation occurs in the heart, the tajalli, the tajalliyat. This tajalliyat is what we all, hope for and pray for, that God opens up into our hearts certain things and endows us with certain kind of special insight and a special value that we will gain because of that. Ghazali also talks about, two kinds of knowledge, intellect-driven knowledge and revealed knowledge. The book calls it, divine law, but it's not right. Shara is that which has been given, that which has been revealed. And Sharia is that path that is charted out. So people, have kind of clunky translations. But more importantly than correcting the translation, more importantly is that that he says the intellectual knowledge, the intellect-driven knowledge, is axiomatic, self-evident. You know that you can't be in two places at once. You know that 3 is larger than 1. And other words that we use for that, we say it's a natural intellect. It is self-evident. It is innate. These are the other terms we use. There's a self-evident, innate, and so on. Then there's this acquired knowledge. Acquired knowledge through 2 ways. One is acquired by transmission, but what you hear via the tradition. And the other is through reflection. When you reflect and, there's a tree and there are apples lying at the bottom of this tree, and it doesn't look like someone has placed these apples there, then you deduce, you make an inference that these apples come from this tree. You see the relationships and so on. So it's both that combination of knowledge through deduction and knowledge through acquisition, through learning, through what we call traditional knowledge, what we are taught from the Quran and the Sunnah and so on and so forth. And he says both, the axiomatic and the acquired knowledge are called aqli, or these are intellectual knowledges. But I think the quotation from Imam Ali is really great. He says, I beheld the intellect as it were twofold. The intellect is innately endowed and developed through instruction or hearing. Knowledge by instruction, he says, that is knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah, is of little use if it does not correspond to what is innate or instinctive. Knowledge of tradition by instruction is of little use if it does not correspond to what is innate or instinctive. Then you have a hard challenge then. Okay? He says, just as the sun is of little use when the seeing eye is obscured. That's very, very important insight. And I think most of us don't think in this way. And Ghazali says, no, you have to think in this way. You need to understand that the knowledge of tradition cannot be completely cut off from intellect-driven knowledge. And Imam Ali is instructed to fasten onto the dignity of the intellect. Some people get close to God by following authority and do the good. But if you use your intellect properly, you can yourself become a wholesaler and make vast amounts of good possible. In other words, you can become the author of the good. Ghazali then talks about the image of the pen. So this is very important. To have a sound intellect is that you can do much more than what you have heard from tradition, but you can also build on it, or you can be creative in building the good, in generating the good. The image of the pen, the image then on the writing of the heart, the subtlety of the inner sight, the rider and mount image. So the image of the pen and the writing on the heart. These are important symbolism that I will possibly spend some time next week to elaborate further, and subtlety of insight, because we are running short of time, and the subtlety of inner sight, basira, that we need to have. But Ghazali thinks about that the soul is the rider and the body is the mount, and he makes it very clear that if the soul doesn't have eyes, it is much more dangerous for the rider. In other words, the soul must have eyes. If the soul has a disability, you are a danger to yourself and to others. And how to understand revealed knowledge? The understanding is required. The heart is made perfect, or the health of the heart is improved by revealed knowledge. It provides immunity from disease. And the health of the heart requires the intellectual sciences, but that is not sufficient. It needs more. It requires experiential knowledge from physicians of the heart, prophets, sages, and saints. And that is how Ghazali sees. I don't want to say it's as kind of a synthesis, but it is just the way these things operate. They always operate together. And oftentimes I think we make this monumental mistake that's saying, you must have aql and naql, you must have reason and, it's not reason and tradition. No, it is, they always operate together. One cannot do without the other. So they are interdependent. The one is dependent on the other. It's not, these are not, there's no wall, there's no boundary, there's no separation. One might not be sufficient for that. Just as knowledge of tradition is insufficient on its own, so too is knowledge of the intellect insufficient on its own. And I think that's where we often make a mistake when we don't pay attention to how Ghazali is putting. These are interdependent, they are related to each other, they are not separated. Experiential knowledge requires intellect, and Ghazali says intellect cannot dispense with instruction, nor can instruction dispense with intellect. There's a great quote on page 48 that you can go through. I'm not going to go through it right now. I wanted to bring you to a great insight that encapsulates all of this, which is a poem of Iqbal, the poet of the subcontinent, where Iqbal says, "Kabhi e haqiqat muntazar nazar aa libas e majaz mein ke hazaron sajde tarap rahe hai meri jabin niyaz mein tarab ashna e kharosh ho tu nawaye mehram gosh ho wo sarod kya chupa hua ho sukut e parda saz mein." And he goes on, and the last line is that, jo main sar pe sajda hua kabhi to zameen se aane lagi sada tera dil to hai sanam ashna tujhe kya milega namaz mein. And this is the longer poem that captures a lot of these things. Ghazali's Iqbal says, "O you, the awaited real, for once appear in mundane garb, for in my obeisant forehead 1,000 prostrations lie astir." Then Iqbal becomes animated and he says, "Learn to desire the noise of love. You are the melody, be a confidant to ears." This is a conversation Iqbal is having with God. And he says, what good is a song if it lies hidden in the quiet of the instrument's frets? So Iqbal is asking God, show me who you are. Show me who you are. Come out. I want to see you. And after reading Ghazali, we know that Iqbal is meaning, come into my heart. I want to feel you. I want to touch you. Do not be too protective of it. So here's the mirror image. Do not be protective of it. Don't worry, my heart can handle it. The mirror, the heart. And he talks about if the mirror is broken, it'll be more precious in the eyes of the maker of the mirrors. It'll be more precious in the eyes of God when the mirror is broken. And you remember the hadith that says that Allah is with those whose hearts are broken. Munkasirat qulubahum. The ones whose hearts are broken. Then he switches. He says, you know, a glowworm going around a candle. The circling glowworm said to the candle that vintage power to move is absent from your story of burning. And also the glowworm says, you know, my talk of melting, that is also weakening. So that's one move Iqbal says, makes. He talks about the burning and the talking all becoming softened. And then he says, you know, my wretched self. This is a ghazal doesn't have a continuous theme. It has multiple themes in it. My wretched self found no quarter in the world. And when it did find refuge, where do you think it found sanctuary? And this is what, you know, this takes my breath away. I found it in your exclusive forgiveness, where my sin-drenched life found ultimate refuge. And then I found it in your exclusive forgiveness, where my sin-drenched life found ultimate refuge. Then he switches, you know, because he's talking about the state of the heart. The heart is something that continues to fluctuate. So therefore, he talks about, you know, the glowworm, and the glowworm saying, you know, your story of burning is weakening, and so is my talk of melting. He talks about this famous story of Mahmud al-Ghaznavi, and Mahmud al-Ghaznavi had a slave whose name was Ayaz, and there was amazing kind of, you know, relationship of love between the two of them. And you know, he says, now love no longer has that fervor, nor does beauty enjoy the charm of playful mischief. The Ghaznavi, Mahmud al-Ghaznavi, no longer has that yearning, nor does Ayaz's tresses possess that curl, that beauty. You see the aesthetic dimension. And then comes this knockout line. When sometimes I lay my head prostrate, I hear the earth reproach me. Your heart is infested by idols. How can you ever profit from prayer? Tera dil to hai sanam ashina, tujhe kya milega namaz mein. So, yeah, that's where Iqbal brings us, captures many of the things we talked about today. Let me stop there.
Shukran, Ibrahim. Jazakumullah khairan. That was really a cherry on the cake, that last poem. Just knockout. You knocked us all out. Shukran. Thank you so much for sacrificing your time and sharing your wisdom with us. We are really appreciative, and we hope that at least some of us, if not all of us, will benefit not only intellectually but also in our spiritual journeys from this reading and this exercise, inshallah. So the questions that we have there, if anyone would like to be a respondent to any of those questions, please post your email in the chat, or you could also write to Jamia, you know, afterwards. I'm not sure, Ibrahim, we have any time for questions, since we are already almost on 20.
Yeah. But I have to honor Iman's question. She asked me a question about, you know, when I talked about last week about, you know, God's will, but God also, you know, wills to lead other people, lead other people astray. So what we need to understand, that everything in the world that happens on the Mashiatullah, the will of God. Nothing can operate in that way. But whether God wants that for us, whether God desires that for us, that's a different question. In that, what God desires for us, God desires for us, you know, the good. But when we choose to do not the good, when we do something that is wrong, then God is not going to stop us, because the operation of the will of God will go into it will kick in. The Mashiatullah, the will of God will do. If you take a knife and you stab somebody, you're going to hurt or kill that person. That is your choice. But what God wills for you, And that is the reason you took the knife, is because your fitra has been perverted. All the natural dispositions in you have been perverted. You allowed bestiality and brutishness and satanic qualities to dominate you. So that is the cause of the injury, the harm that you did. But the fact that you're going to hit the knife and the knife is not going to go blunt, that is not the Mashiatullah. That is not the Sunnatullah. That is not the way in which God operates in the world. So I think it's a little bit tricky to understand that nothing can happen without the will of God. But what God intends for us, what God wishes for us, that is something different. God wishes good for us. But then comes in our choice, our decision that we make. And when we make our decision, then that decision is going to kick in the laws of nature. And the laws of nature are in the control of God. Now, sometimes God puts his hand on the laws of nature, which we call the intervention, the miracle. The fire goes cool for Ebrahim alayhi salam, and other events that are, but that is when God chooses to do so, to do the miracle, to do the intervention. But otherwise the rule operates. And the only way that can change is if our hearts change and we become conforming to the good and the beautiful and those things, and we suppress our negative qualities and let the positive qualities come. We can continue this conversation in another forum, inshallah.
Shukran, Ibrahim. Just a closing dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Rabbana zidna ilma warzuqna fahma. Allahumma innaka afuun tuhibbul afwa fa'afu anna. O Allah, thou art the pardoner and the forgiver. Thou loves to pardon and to forgive. We beseech you, O Allah, to pardon and to forgive us our human frailties and indiscretions. Allahumma innaka afuun tuhibbul afwa fa'afu anna. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.